Hello, David Reese Elementary. It is Karen Flores, and I am here to talk to you about close reading through text-dependent questionnaires on the webinar today. Just a review of what close reading is. Close reading is an opportunity that we provide for our kids to have a thoughtful, critical analysis of a text, focusing on significant details, patterns, in order to develop a deep, precise understanding of the text form, craft, meanings, etc. It's also one of the key requirements of the Common Core State Standards and directs the reader's attention to the text in and of itself. We also know that we don't engage in a close read with students without a text that is of a complex nature, which is why we started our development back in December on talking about text complexity. When we talk about close reading, we want to have a couple of salient features present. We want to ensure that we're using a short, complex passage. We're engaging kids in repeated readings. We're offering an opportunity for annotation, whether that's through pictures or through words. We're allowing kids to have opportunities to engage in collaborative conversations. And then we are also making sure that through that close read, we are focusing on asking text-dependent questions. The short, complex passage is key, and as the educator in the classroom, this is going to be something that you're going to need to use your discretion on in terms of what is the healthy amount of text that your kids will be able to digest. While short is always the variable that we want to make sure we keep our eye on, how short is then where your expertise is going to need to come in. However, I just want to make sure that no matter what the length of the text that we are choosing to engage our kids in a learning experience with, the challenge to the reader's thinking and understanding has to be a variable that's present. When we're focusing on text-dependent questions, we want to make sure that we are strategically focusing our attention on challenging or confusing parts of the text. Oftentimes, some of those aspects can include looking at the structure, meaning, and inferences that can be drawn, and most importantly, we are always going to ask our students to support their responses to the questions that we're asking with evidence from the text. Text-dependent questions will really help develop the habit of thinking critically. It's something that provides an opportunity for students to follow their own lines of thinking and really create that assessment capability in and of themselves, and something that is not going to always need the teacher's support. And the text-dependent questions really are a product of your close reading of the text initially before you engage your students in that learning process with you. So when we talk about text-dependent questions, there are 4 levels of them. We first want to look at what does the text say. We then move into some structural components and looking at how does the text work. And then as we look at what does the text mean, we're trying to make some inferences or quite possibly some intertextual connections. When we look at that 4th question of what does the text inspire you to do, the inspiration is still grounded in an instructional platform, in an instructional setting. And so in a couple of examples of what the text might inspire you to do as a student, it might inspire you to have this serve as the topic when you engage in an informative essay writing activity with your class 2 weeks down the road. It may inspire you to want to engage in a classroom debate with your peers around something that has become very deep in terms of something that it means to you as a student. So while the language in and of itself, the word inspire, can connote something a little bit differently, the inspiration is still always going to be grounded in the learning experience that the kids were a part of. And so when we look at the progression of text-dependent questions, we are trying to begin with making sure that there's a basic surface level comprehension, but we're also making sure that we move those students into an opportunity for deep analysis of the text. When we looked at the 4 types of text-dependent questions, you can see 3 of them to the left of the screen. And then as you move across from left to right, you can see that when we talk about what does the text say at the bottom, and we move to the right, we see that we're going to look at key details and general understandings. Our text-dependent questions are going to focus on those 2 components, and moving all the way to the far right, we're really still at the very literal level. When we begin to progress and go in for perhaps a second read, we're now looking to help ourselves define how does this text work. And so we're looking at the author's craft and the purpose. We're looking at the vocabulary used and the way that the text has been structured. And this is now moving us into the structural level. When we reach the top of this hierarchy, and we're now starting to talk about what does the text mean, That's when we're looking at different opinions and arguments that have been presented by authors. We're looking for those intertextual connections, and at this point now we're going to use the information that we've been able to glean through the literal and structural components to begin to make inferences about what that text is saying to us. So let's go through an example that we used back when we were together, and this is going to just take us through each of the levels of text-dependent questions using the text, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So if we're beginning at the bottom of our pyramid, of our hierarchy, and we're talking about general understandings, something that you might ask the kids to perform in terms of a task would be to retell the story in order using the words beginning, middle, and end. As we move into trying to identify some key details, and again, we're still at that literal level, we might ask questions about how long did it take to go from a hatched egg to a butterfly? What is one food that gave him a stomachache, and what is one food that did not give him a stomachache? And here we have a piece from the text, evidence from the text. It took more than 3 weeks. He ate for 1 week, and then he stayed inside his cocoon for more than 2 weeks. Not only through the process of doing a close read, we're asking kids not the text-dependent question, we're also going to bring them back to the text when possible and when needed to support and looking at the evidence that helps guide them to the right response. We could also have them do a small T-chart. What are some foods that did not give him a stomachache, and what are some foods that gave him a stomachache? Going back to the text, using the evidence that's in front of us as a reader. When we move into vocabulary, even though we know, as we talked about in December, when Eric Carle uses the word cocoon, it was a little bit of an error. We're really looking for chrysalis, but for the sake of this webinar, we're going to stay with the language that was initially published. So when we're talking about vocabulary, how does the author help us to understand what cocoon means? And if we take a look at a piece of evidence in the text that would support our readers in doing this, there is an illustration of the cocoon and a sentence that reads, "He built a small house called a cocoon around himself." By helping support readers in understanding where that evidence is in the text and continuing to reiterate the practice and the habit of finding that evidence in the text is going to strengthen the performance and the growth of achievement of your kids as a whole. When we move into the author's purpose, and we're still using the same text, the question that we might pose to our kids is, who tells the story, the narrator or the caterpillar? And once again, if we go back to some of the evidence in the text, we'd be able to say that a narrator tells us the story because he uses the words he and his. If it was the caterpillar, he would say I and my. There's even really a very quick opportunity to talk about pronoun use and then even become more aware of the coherence component that is present when we are reading different pieces of text. When we move on, and we're kind of getting to that higher level now, we're at that inferential stage, we want kids, even at the kindergarten level, to be able to make inferences from the text that they're exposed to or that they're reading or getting read. And so the question that we might pose is, the title of the book is The Very Hungry Caterpillar. How do we know that he's hungry? Well, here we go. Again, back to a piece in the text. The caterpillar ate food every day, but he was still hungry. On Saturday, he ate so much food he got a stomachache. Then he was a big, fat caterpillar, so he could build a cocoon and turn into a butterfly. There's a pattern here. We're always bringing the reader, if they can't do it on their own, we're helping them as the teacher to bring them back to the text and find the evidence that helps us answer the question posed. And then, even to make intertextual connections at the kindergarten level, you can see that there is a narrative of the very hungry caterpillar, but then there's a informational text on monarch butterflies. And so what we can pose to the kids is, this, for a narrative, is this a happy story or a sad one? How do you know? Now we're focusing on that opinion piece, right? How do you know? What's your opinion? But I want you to support your opinion with evidence. To then making that intertextual connection, we're now moving over to the question posed under the informational book, or right above the informational text. How are these two books similar? How are they different? And so regardless of the level in which our learners are at, there is definitely an ability to design and then expose our students to text-dependent questions. And again, remember that the premise and the point of moving throughout the different levels of questioning, from that very literal to some structural to that inferential piece at the top, is so that we can go and move from a general understanding to a deep analysis of the text. I just want to remind you before we close of a tool that we utilized when we were together in December. This is also uploaded into the resource folder that Dave and I have created for David Reese, but this is just a very simple graphic organizer. And what I really appreciate about this is that not only does it ask you to think about and create and generate those text-dependent questions prior to the learning experience, but it also is going to ask you to go through a moment of reflection to look at and assess the effectiveness of what that text-dependent question, the power that it had in the classroom to help move your readers and also help you as an educator better identify where the needs of your kids were still at. So once again, if there are ever any questions or if you are in need of additional support or resources, Dave and I are always happy to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking or working with you very soon. Thank you.